Thanks very much, Mary. First of all, I would like to thank the leadership and sponsors of Nuffield Ireland, as well as my employer, Board BIA, along with my family and my wife, Tish. As Mary said, the topic of my presentation is efficient, sustainable beef production using dairy-bred animals. As part of my study, I visited Australia, New Zealand, the US, South America, and some of the leading beef producers around Europe, including in the UK, the Netherlands, Spain, France, and Italy. Suppose you may ask yourself, why did I decide to concentrate on dairy-bred animals? The first major reason that I focused on this area was the significant expansion that we have seen in recent years in the supply of these animals. We've seen in the last few years an increase of over 200,000 head in the number of calf registrations to the Irish dairy herd. And even this year it has increased by a further 70,000, having risen by over 110,000 last year. So this is a significant increase in supply that is going to have a tangible impact on our beef industry, on our livestock sector. Second reason then, I suppose, is the potential which exists at farm level to improve the sustainability and the efficiency of beef production. And again, as we heard from Michael Hoy earlier, sustainability is a much used word and perhaps abused in some cases. But in this context, Irish beef has a very good news story to tell with regard to sustainability. For example, the carbon footprint of Irish beef is the 5th lowest in Europe. And in general, measures at farm level to improve environmental sustainability will also result in improved profitability and efficiency. But what's also interesting is that there's a dramatic difference between the average carbon footprint coming from different production systems. In fact, the average carbon footprint of 19 kilos, so that's the Irish figure, it represents a measure of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of a kilo of Irish beef. But the figure for beef coming from the suckler herd is in fact significantly higher than the carbon footprint for beef which originates from dairy-bred animals. And the main reason for this is that from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, that calf coming from the dairy herd is effectively treated as a byproduct. You don't need to keep a suckler cow, a mature breeding animal, for the entire year to produce that calf, in contrast with the suckler-bred animal. And what is also very interesting is that looking at the top 25% of beef producers in this system surveyed, they were even able to achieve an even lower figure, an even greater reduction in their carbon footprint. So this is interesting in the context of the commitments which Ireland has made under COP21, under Foodwise 2025, and also, as we heard earlier, in relation to Origin Green. There is potential at farm level to improve the sustainability of beef production. In relation to then the breeds of these dairy-bred calves, and last year, as we saw, there was 1.25 million dairy-bred calves produced, and 60% of those were sired by a dairy sire. So obviously those farmers, their main objective was to produce a replacement heifer. In 50% of cases, though, it led to the production of a male calf. To date, the uptake and the utilisation of sexed semen in the Irish dairy herd is very, very low. And this is an area which there was a large-scale trial carried out in 2013, but it's indeed an area where further research and indeed hopefully fine-tuning of the production methods is required, because it would be a real game changer. Then the remaining 40% of cows are inseminated to beef bull or crossed to beef sire, and the most popular breed is Angus, followed by Hereford, and then Limousin would be the next most popular after that. The main reason, obviously, that farmers would consider crossing their dairy cows and dairy heifers with a beef sire is the resulting increase in the value of those calves. And this table, I know you won't see it down the back, but it explains and measures the average prices for which calves were sold in spring of 2016. And the average Frisian bull calf or male Holstein Frisian calf sold for just under €100. And each of the respective beef breeds then, Angus, Hereford, Limousin and Belgian Blue, those calves were all sold for between 100 and 200 euro more than what the Frisian bull calf sold for. So, that is an important additional revenue stream for many dairy farmers that are crossing with beef sires. It's also worth pointing out, I suppose the low figure here in the corner refers to the male Jersey calf, which on average sold for just 30 euro. And the numbers of these Jersey crosses, relatively speaking, in the overall national herd context, they're relatively small. It's less than 2% of calf registrations to dairy cows that are sired by a Jersey bull. However, in countries where this is a significant part of the herd, it has to be noted that where animals are being produced that have a very low value, that tends to have a knock-on impact maybe on the potential animal welfare issues relating to those animals. And in New Zealand in spring of last year, many of you will remember that there was an animal welfare related controversy whereby calves were shown to have been mistreated, and there was footage on the internet and there was a widespread outcry. That relates to, in New Zealand, over 2 million calves every spring are processed at about 1 week of age. They're mainly Jersey bull calves. There's no real value, there's no real market associated with them, and so they go for processing for slaughter at just a week of age, and that is known as bobby veal. But it's not something that we would like Ireland to become associated with, and obviously those negative images have a knock-on impact on all of the sector, not just on dairy, not just on beef, it's all of our reputations. I next want to focus on the live export market, because this represents a real source of competition and an alternative outlet for many, especially of the dairy-bred calves which are born. You can see there in 2010, live exports were very significant, and in that year 160,000 calves were exported live, most of those animals being male Holstein Friesian calves. So that represented almost 50% of the available supply of Holstein Friesian male calves in that year, so it is significant. In most years, however, it tends to range from 80 to 100,000, being around the average level of exports of calves. And the main exports for these Holstein Friesian bull calves are the Netherlands and Spain. And I was fortunate to visit both of those markets during my studies. I went to Holland, where there is a very intensive veal processing industry, and that industry slaughters in excess of 1.5 million calves every year from all different nationalities, a lot of Dutch calves, but also German calves, Polish calves, calves from Eastern Europe. These were some Irish calves being produced for white veal, and it's a very integrated production system. There are fewer than 2,000 farmers now remaining in veal production in the Netherlands, so they're large scale, and it operates very similar to the way that the poultry industry operates. The farmer receives the calf and he receives the feed, and in return then for a management fee, he looks after the calves and he achieves the performance targets that are agreed with the processor or the other partner. The other market then that I visited in Europe was Spain, where they have a very intensive production system involving the production of young dairy-bred bulls at just 12 months of age. And their key focus in that production system, always in their head, is around feed conversion efficiency. Their aim is to produce an FCE of less than 5 to 1. So 5 kilograms of feed per 1 kilogram of live weight gain. You contrast that to the Irish situation, where many farmers would be more like 10 to 1 in our beef production system. So very interesting to look at those efficiencies overseas. But what was also interesting was that in general in Spain, those beef producers are actually receiving a lower price for their carcasses than what we get here in Ireland. But because of their efficiencies, because of their orientation, I suppose, also around market and producing an animal at the most efficient stage, they're actually able to even still manage to make that profitable. So moving on to the market, every production system, every market, we have to consider what our customers looking for, what our processors looking for. And we have had in place for several years now the QPS, the quality payment system, which rewards cattle which are of greater conformation. And we know that that is because animals with better conformation, more developed muscularity, that tends to result in a higher yield of saleable meat. And in addition to the bonuses or the variables for conformation, there is also a 12 cents a kilo premium for production of cattle within the right inspect grades and being quality assured. Now, in addition to conformation, it's very important that the carcass produces meat cuts which are of the desired shape, so that they can be presented easily and I suppose look well as eating well. What's also important is that the steak cuts of the animal, there are just 4 steak cuts, mostly located in the loin of the animal, and they only represent 12% of the total carcass weight. But in fact, they actually account for over 1/3 of the value of the animal. So it's very important that we maximize the value of those steak cuts. This is particularly an issue with some of the plainer animals, whether they be of extreme dairy genetics or whether they be underfinished, and it leads to potential issues. And I'll give you 2 very quick examples. One is of a P-grade steer, just a plain animal, maybe slightly underfinished as well at a fat score 2+, and under the QPS currently at a base price of $370. Because that animal is -36, he's down here in the lowest price category, he would be priced obviously at $334, so he's -36. And if you contrast that to an animal then with better presentation of steak cuts, better saleable meat yield, and this animal is a beef cross steer out of the dairy herd and graded an R-3. So that would be on the upper end of any of these beef crosses that are being produced, it has to be said, but obviously that is then incurring a price of the base price adjusted with 12 cents of a bonus, so $382. And in the case if it was an Angus or a Hereford animal, it would then be incurring also a breed bonus on top of that. So the reason that I give you that example is to show the stark difference, the contrast between those 2 carcasses and their values. There's over 50 cents a kilo there almost, even before you take the breed bonus into account. And these breed producer groups have been very successful in recent years in being a good example of collaboration between producers, breed societies and processors. And many of these animals are coming from a dairy background, either Angus or Hereford, and now Shorthorn as well too is an example where bonuses are being paid to animals. The size of the bonus depends on the time of the year, whether the animals are booked in advance, in line with the producer groups and their criteria. And it's also important as well too that the animals aren't just AAX or HEX on the card. They have to be sired by a pedigree bull, so they have to be 50%. Not less than that. So these breed-specific programs are interesting. This is a photo from my own farm at home of some Angus animals. We supply some animals into these schemes. And another photo as well too, and you'll be looking at that wondering, those of you that are up the front that can see that, what type of beasts are they? And actually this is an example from my travels of Wagyu cross animals, again from a dairy background. So this was a very successful producer group in New Zealand known as First Light Foods. And they're currently marketing over 30,000 of these cattle, so they're Wagyu cross out of a dairy herd, and very, very successful. These cattle are achieving a premium of the equivalent of almost €1 a kilo. So very, very successful. It's being marketed as New Zealand grass-fed Wagyu beef. But what's also interesting about it is that, a bit like the Dutch example, it's an integrated supply chain, and that the farmer knows exactly where he is going at every stage. The farmer that inseminates the cow with the Wagyu straw knows that they will get a minimum guaranteed price for that calf. The farmer that in turn buys that calf and rears it through to beef, long ahead of supplying the animal, they know the minimum price that they can accept, that they can expect to receive for their finished animal. So this is a very good example of a value-added integrated supply chain. Another example then from the UK, I visited a producer called Gary Alice. Gary is slaughtering almost 1,500 black and white bulls every year. He's supplying Adam Butelar's Roseville premium beef supply chain. And similar as well too, he knows exactly as well too in advance, because it's locked in and they know the number of animals that are coming through the system and have that tailored with their demands then, their requirements with their customers. These are young bulls which are slaughtered at under 12 months, so it's seen as a welfare-friendly alternative maybe to some of the continental veal systems. And indeed, these are now slaughtering almost 600 cattle a week, so it is growing and it's very successful. So, in summary, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to go through a few of the key recommendations from my report. Firstly, I found and believe that a dedicated dairy beef research centre should be established by Teagasc, focusing on all areas from calf rearing through to the finishing and slaughter of these animals. I believe that a dairy beef index should be finalised by ICBF and Teagasc in order to give dairy farmers the confidence to select beef bulls with which to produce easy calving, short gestation and good quality calves. Next recommendation then is that producers should receive consistent market signals from the industry regardless of the prevailing supply situation. So if an animal is acceptable today, it should still continue to be acceptable in 3 months or 6 months down the line. An IBR control program, this is something that I saw on the live export front that really could do with being developed by the Department of Agriculture. IBR, or infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, is a respiratory disease that affects young cattle, and some member states around Europe have already basically declared that they will not import cattle from a country that does not have an IBR control program. And Ireland, we've already lost the Belgian market for Irish live exports, and unless we develop this programme, it looks set that other markets will follow suit, and it will close options for us, including for live calves in the springtime of the year. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, my final point is in relation to the examples that we saw internationally of bad consumer reaction to animal welfare issues, and in that context, everyone in the livestock industry and in this particular area of dairy calves should be conscious and not become complacent of their social license to operate. So thanks very much for your attention.